In January of 1995, a group of terrorists planned a large three-phase attack that included the assassination of Pope John Paul II, blowing up 11 airliners over the Pacific, and finally crashing a plane into the headquarters of the CIA. This terrorist attack would have been by far the largest and most deadly event of its type, had it happened. But it did not. For reasons we will discuss in this video, the plot was uncovered and ultimately stopped by the Philippine National Police. And so we are lucky enough to be spared the real horrors. We can only imagine things in this very first minute-by-minute recreation of the biggest terrorist plot that never happened. This is the Bojinka Plot, visualized. Ramzi Ahmed Yusuf came to the United States in 1992. As the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, architect of the 9/11 attacks, he was radicalized at a young age. In 1993, he was the main culprit behind the World Trade Center bombing, which may have only killed 6 people, but was envisioned as the largest attack to date. Yusuf's original intention was to topple the North into the South Tower, destroying both buildings and killing 250,000 people. In reality, of course, a typical number of civilians in both towers would have been below 20,000. But this longing to kill innocent civilians at a large scale would continue after his escape from the United States. In the following years, he was involved in at least 3 other plots, most notably the bombing of Philippine Airlines Flight 434, which left 1 Japanese passenger dead and paved the way for his most ambitious project yet. After Yusuf arrived in the Philippines, he formed what would later be known as the Manila Cell, a terrorist group with ties to Al-Qaeda. Their first plot would be the assassination of then US President Bill Clinton during a visit to the Philippines, an idea allegedly put forward by bin Laden himself. But after realizing how tight Clinton's security during the visit would be, the idea was quickly abandoned. Instead, Yusuf proposed to target Pope John Paul II with a suicide attack. He would also travel to Manila for World Youth Day 1995. The plan was then for a member of the group to dress up as a Catholic priest with a Bible in hand to not raise suspicion when he would go near the Pope with a suicide vest. But this was all just supposed to be a smokescreen, a diversion from the main part of the plan that was to cause even bigger devastation. In the time leading up to the Pope's visit, Yusuf was busy building and testing bombs. His idea was to plant them on flights with more than 1 leg, which meant that he could get on board, assemble the bomb, place it somewhere mid-flight and then get out before it would explode. This in turn would mean that each attacker could theoretically target an infinite number of planes, as long as they got through security. And that is exactly what Yusuf accomplished on December 11, 1994, when he successfully boarded Philippine Airlines Flight 434, a Boeing 747 at Manila International Airport. And after the flight took off for Cebu International, Yusuf assembled the bomb inside the lavatory and then put it inside the life vest pocket right under his seat, where it wouldn't be immediately found. And with all the preparations finished, he finally disembarked at Cebu International. On the second leg of the flight, bound for Narita Airport, his seat was taken by Haruki Ikegami, a Japanese engineer who returned from a business trip. 2 hours after takeoff, when the plane was just over Minami-dai Tojima, the bomb exploded and killed Ikegami. And while the plane was able to make an emergency landing at Naha Airport, Yusuf saw this as a success because in principle the plan worked, and the only thing left to do was multiply the number of attackers and bombs. During the investigation, the FBI secured files from Yusuf's laptop. 2 text files of particular interest were hidden in the Windows folder. They contained flight scheduling data for 12 flights, separated into 5 groups for different attackers. Furthermore, 3 pieces of information were provided for each flight: setting, the time at which the countdown should be started, timer, the duration of the countdown, and Bojinka, a word that was widely reported to mean explosion in Serbo-Croatian, although this turned out to be incorrect. It's a nonsense word that Yusuf probably misheard someone say when he fought in Afghanistan. Nonetheless, in this context, it describes the predicted time at which the bomb would explode, expressed in Japanese Standard Time. With this information in hand, let's examine what the plan would have looked like. The first attacker, codenamed Obaid, would board United Airlines 80 at 8:35 from Singapore to San Francisco. set the timer for 10 hours, and get off in Hong Kong 4 hours later. He would then wait 8 hours and board another UA-80 in the opposite direction, flying back to Singapore. Without him on board, the plane would then take off to Hong Kong and finally San Francisco after that. The second attacker, codenamed Zaid, was probably Yusuf himself, and he would place a total of 3 bombs. First, he would board Northwest Airlines 30 in Manila at 8 in the morning, set the timer for 10 hours and disembark in Seoul. The plane would continue to LAX without him, and in Seoul, Zaid would enter United Airlines 827 to Honolulu and set the timer for 23 hours, before getting off in Taipei. There he would have little more than an hour to catch his final plane, United Airlines 845 to San Francisco, where he would set the timer for 20 hours and disembark in Bangkok. The third attacker, named Maroka, would start his journey in Singapore and take Northwest Flight 6 to Chicago, set the timer for 11 hours and get off in Tokyo. After 3 hours of waiting, he would board Northwest Airlines Flight 17 back to Hong Kong and set the timer to 23 hours. The bomb would then explode on the flight's final leg to New York. The fourth attacker, named Matbus, would again start in Singapore and take the 8 AM flight to LAX, set the timer to 10 hours before leaving the plane in Tokyo at around 1 PM. From Tokyo, he would fly into the opposite direction, back to Hong Kong, and set the bomb's timer aboard UA-801 to 24 hours. This would ensure that the bomb would explode on the way across the Pacific towards, once again, New York JFK. The fifth and final attacker had the codename Mirkas, and here the information gets a bit sketchy because some of the flight destinations are incomplete. The bomb timers are partially missing and one flight is actually a duplicate. From old airline schedules we can infer that he would first take a plane to San Francisco, but disembark in Seoul, after setting the timer to a staggering 56 hours. Ignoring how this would give investigators ample time to discover the bomb, Mirkas would then board the duplicate flight UA-827 to Honolulu, but disembark in Taipei, with the bomb having already been set by Zaid. Finally, the last flight would take him from Taipei to Bangkok, with the plane flying to Portland International Airport afterwards. After all bombs were set, the 5 terrorists would catch flights to Pakistan to evade investigators and lay low until the final step of the plan. Now, this was all very confusing, so let's take a deep breath and look at things from a slightly different perspective. On that Sunday, January 15, 1995, the Pope would fall victim to a suicide attack that either left him dead or gravely injured from an explosion. The press would talk about little else for days, and many people in the West, both religious and secular, would see this as deeply troubling news. Only 1 week later, on the 21st of January, 8 PM Japanese time and 3 AM in the Western US, United Airlines Flight 80 and Northwest Flight 30 would perish over the Pacific. Around 400 people would die in an instant. But even before the first news would reach the average US citizen, Northwest Flight 6 and United Airlines 890 would approximately double the number of victims. The average 90s kid would turn on the TV on a Saturday to watch cartoons while eating cereals. But all channels would show the same program: 4 planes missing over the Pacific, foul play suspected. In hindsight, we know now that in such a situation, air travel may be halted, as it was after the September 11 attacks. But what if it was not? What if air travel from Asia would continue, or no foul play was yet suspected? Well, it would only take until 6 PM Japanese time or 1 AM on Sunday morning in the Western US that 6 more planes would explode over the span of 6 hours. With victims in the thousands, this situation would be akin to the aftermath of 9/11, and all planes worldwide would probably be grounded. It is highly unlikely that the last bomb that is still waiting on board United Airlines 808 would kill anyone, but even still, the magnitude of this disaster would be without equal. Now, about that final part of his plan, honestly, it is somewhat hard to believe that after all of this, Yusuf would still somehow find a way to get into the US. And even renting a small plane to then crash into the CIA headquarters seems a bit far-fetched. But well, let's not speculate any further, because thanks to either a blunder inside the Manila cell or deliberate action by the Philippine police, a fire was started in room 603, Yusuf's Manila apartment. Members of the cell tried to flee, but were ultimately arrested, 6 days before the Pope was scheduled to arrive. And while many have argued that this terrorist attack was later used as the blueprint for the 9/11 attacks, there was certainly no Ramzi Youssef involved. As of 2022, he is still incarcerated at ADX Florence, in what is referred to as Bombers Row, together with other high-profile terrorists like Ted Kaczynski and Terry Nichols. Hey everyone, thank you for watching video number 8. I hope you enjoyed it, despite the relatively dire subject matter. I know videos on terrorism can be a bit hard to digest, but this was actually one of the first topics I wanted to make a video on when I started the channel. Although for the longest time I didn't really know how to make it visually appealing, and honestly I still don't know if this was really the best approach. In any event, hope you guys liked it, and if you did, I'll see you next time.